The reservation was for two. But when the waiter placed down the third menu, Anna's heart skipped a beat. She'd been staring across the candlelit table at Daniel, her husband of 15 years, certain tonight would be a quiet dinner, until that extra menu appeared. She glanced at it, then at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. Across the room, she could see the door open again. Footsteps. A woman standing hesitantly before Daniel raised his hand. In those seconds, Anna felt the air shift. She realized this dinner wasn't about romance. It was about secrets. What no one at that table yet knew was that nothing would ever be the same after this night. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. From the moment Anna arrived at the restaurant, she sensed something was off. Daniel insisted on a special night out, yet his eyes were distant. She watched as he waved at the host and guided her past flickering candles, past patrons laughing, to a secluded corner booth. The waiter approached with menus, and Anna's breath caught when she saw 3 fold-out pages instead of 2. Her mind raced. Did he invite someone else? Or was it a mistake? She lifted the third menu, fingers trembling, and her stomach dropped when Daniel's hand hovered over it. The somber hush that followed felt heavy, like a warning. The third menu was more than a misstep. It was a signal. And Anna understood in that quiet, perfumed air that the rest of her life might hinge on how she responded. This evening's restaurant was elegant, dimly lit, tables spaced just far enough apart to feel private. The hostess led Karen and Michael past low murmurs and clinking glasses to a secluded booth. He clasped her hand briefly, flashes of conversation drifting in the background. Michael had insisted on this dinner, saying it was urgent. As the waiter approached with menus, Karen felt her skin prickle. There were 3 menus, folded neatly, not 2 as expected. Her breath caught, and Michael reached for one, then glanced at the other. And finally his eyes flicked toward a distant corner of the room. She followed his gaze. Why was that third menu present? Who would need it? Was it an innocent mistake? Or something deliberate? Was someone joining them tonight who Karen didn't know about? What secret did Michael carry so heavily that he risked exposing it in public? Could that extra menu be a sign that Karen's world was about to fracture? And if this dinner was the beginning, how far would the fallout reach? Betrayal, reputation, perhaps even danger. Stay with me as we unravel what happened that night. A story that started with 3 menus and would end in heartbreak, reckoning, and questions that demand answers. Karen had always been known in her community as the reliable one, the kind of woman people turned to when they needed advice, comfort, or a steady presence in times of turmoil. She was deeply involved in the local church and spent her afternoons volunteering at a neighborhood charity that provided food and clothing for families in need. To anyone watching from the outside, she embodied the role of the devoted mother and wife, carefully balancing her time between supporting her daughter Amanda at college and managing a household that reflected warmth and tradition. Yet behind her soft smile, Karen often fought a quiet battle of doubt. She had noticed small things, little interruptions in the ordinary rhythm of life. A late meeting that stretched too long, phone calls taken in the driveway instead of inside the house, and receipts tucked hurriedly into Michael's jacket pocket. For years, she pushed aside these whispers of suspicion, reassuring herself that marriage was about trust, that her husband's long hours were a sacrifice he made for their family's future. But the longer she ignored these signs, the heavier they began to weigh on her heart. Michael, in contrast, was the kind of man who carried himself with quiet confidence. He had always been ambitious, proud of the business he had built, and proud of the lifestyle it afforded his family. But over the years, the warmth in his eyes had dimmed, replaced with a constant distraction, as if his mind lingered elsewhere even when he sat at the dinner table. Karen noticed how often he snapped at questions he once would have answered with patience. When she asked about late nights, he grew tense and short, sometimes dismissive. Once she smelled a faint trace of unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, one that was floral and light, nothing like her own. When she confronted him, he laughed it off, claiming a coworker had given him a hug at a company event. But even as he chuckled, there was a stiffness in his voice that unsettled her. Michael had always been a man of words, yet now, his words no longer comforted her. They unsettled her, leaving Karen wondering if she was losing him piece by piece. Amanda, their only daughter, was the pride of their lives, though her perception of her parents' relationship remained untainted. At 19, she was away at college, busy with classes, friends, and the whirlwind of independence that came with campus life. To her, her parents' marriage was solid, the kind of relationship that provided security even from afar. Amanda would call her mother late at night, sharing stories of her day or worries about exams, never suspecting the tremors of tension growing at home. Karen, determined to protect her, would hide the worry in her voice, keeping her answers light, pretending that all was well. She knew Amanda adored her father, looked up to him as a figure of strength and discipline, and Karen could not bear to shatter that image. Yet each time Amanda asked how things were at home, Karen felt a pang of guilt for the lies she spoke in kindness. Through all of this, Karen leaned heavily on her closest friend, Evelyn, who had been by her side since their days in high school. Evelyn was perceptive, a woman who could read Karen's silences as easily as she could read her words. More than once, Evelyn had pulled her aside and asked if something was wrong, if Michael's distance was becoming too much to ignore. Karen always brushed it off, unwilling to confess aloud what she feared in her heart. But Evelyn remained unconvinced. She had seen Michael's distracted looks at community gatherings, the way he checked his phone during conversations, and she did not trust the explanations Karen tried to offer. "Be careful," Evelyn once told her in a hushed tone, "because sometimes the things we don't want to believe are the ones staring us right in the face." Karen had nodded but said nothing, holding tightly to her belief that her marriage, though strained, was not beyond repair. Still, the quiet evidence continued to grow. Karen remembered one particular evening when Michael returned home later than usual, his shirt wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his eyes evasive. He muttered something about a late dinner with clients, but his phone buzzed constantly on the counter beside him, screen lighting up with messages he never allowed her to see. When Karen pressed for more details, his voice rose with irritation, sharper than she had ever heard. He accused her of being paranoid, of making problems where none existed. That night, as she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while he slept, Karen realized something had changed. The trust she once felt without question was no longer there, and in its place grew a fear she could not name, a fear that her world was quietly unraveling while she pretended nothing was wrong. For weeks, Karen tried to push away these thoughts, clinging to her routines. She poured her energy into her volunteer work, filling food baskets and folding donated clothes, finding solace in the certainty of helping others. But even there, doubt followed her. She noticed how often her mind drifted back to Michael's absences, his sudden temper, the distance that had formed like a shadow in their home. Each time she reached for reassurance, she found only more questions. And though she never voiced them aloud, her heart whispered the truth. Something was coming, something that would force her to face everything she had avoided. She just didn't know when it would arrive. Then came the reservation. The night everything shifted. The restaurant's glow was warm, softened by the amber flicker of candles on each polished wooden table. Karen adjusted the strap of her dress nervously as Michael guided her toward the booth tucked in the corner. The chatter of other patrons rose and fell in gentle waves, yet Karen felt separated from it, caught in the strange silence of her own thoughts. Michael's grip on her arm was firm but not affectionate, more a gesture of direction than tenderness, and as she settled into her seat, she noticed the way his eyes darted toward the door. The waiter arrived promptly, placing 3 menus on the table with an almost imperceptible hesitation, as though he knew something Karen did not. She stared at the trio of menus, her heart thudding as confusion tightened her chest. "There must be a mistake," she whispered, but Michael didn't answer. His fingers tapped against the table, steady at first, then faltering. She followed his gaze again and wondered why he could not meet her eyes. A dinner for two had become a stage for three, and Karen knew she was about to learn something she wasn't prepared to hear. For a long, drawn-out moment, Karen fought against the hope that this was nothing more than an error. Perhaps the waiter miscounted. Perhaps the third menu was meant for another table. She reached across, gently sliding one of the menus toward her, as if by holding it she could erase the doubt creeping into her mind. But Michael's hand stopped hers midway, his palm pressing down on the leather-bound folder with a firmness that startled her. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, he leaned back, adjusting his tie, his expression unreadable. Karen felt the air around them grow heavier, the space between them no longer intimate but tense, brimming with unspoken truth. She thought of Amanda, away at school, blissfully unaware of this dinner and the storm it carried. She thought of Evelyn's warning, her friend's intuition that something was wrong. And for the first time, Karen wondered if she had been willfully blind, ignoring the signs that had been staring at her all along. The sound of the restaurant door opening sliced through the moment, pulling Karen's gaze away from Michael. Her eyes landed on a figure just inside the entrance. A woman, younger, dressed with elegance that seemed effortless. The hostess greeted her, and the woman smiled politely before scanning the room. Karen felt her pulse quicken when she saw Michael lift his hand ever so slightly. A subtle signal, a gesture of recognition. The woman's eyes lit up with acknowledgement, and she began to walk toward them. Karen's throat tightened. This was no stranger casually wandering into their evening. This was someone expected, someone planned for. The third menu was not a mistake. It was an invitation. As the woman approached, Karen's fingers curled against the edge of the table, gripping it as though bracing herself against a wave she could not stop. In that moment she knew. This dinner was not hers to share. She had been summoned into a truth that would cut deeper than anything she had feared. The woman stopped at the table and offered a warm smile that did not reach her eyes. Michael stood briefly, leaning in to greet her with a familiarity that stung Karen like a blade. "Karen, this is Rebecca," he said, his voice low, steady, almost rehearsed. Karen managed a nod, though her chest burned with shock and betrayal. Rebecca slid into the booth beside Michael with ease, leaving Karen isolated on the other side of the table. The waiter, returning with water, glanced at Karen before placing glasses for all three. Karen wondered if he too could sense the shift, the quiet drama playing out between clinking silverware and muted laughter of other diners. Conversation faltered at first, then sputtered into pleasantries. Michael spoke of business, Rebecca chimed in with laughter at just the right moments, and Karen sat silently, the words on her tongue too heavy to release. It was a performance she had not agreed to be part of, yet here she was, trapped in the audience of her own undoing. Every forced smile Rebecca gave, every casual touch on Michael's arm, sent a jolt through Karen. Her hands trembled beneath the tablecloth, hidden from view, her nails digging into her palms. She tried to focus on her breathing, to steady herself, but each detail pushed her further toward despair. Rebecca's youth compared to her own, her bright laughter against Karen's silence, the glimmer in Michael's eyes that Karen hadn't seen directed at her in years. This was not a chance meeting, and it was not innocent. It was intentional, deliberate, and cruel. Karen wanted to stand, to leave, to demand answers, but something in Michael's composure kept her rooted. His confidence, the calm with which he allowed Rebecca to lean closer, made Karen feel as though she had lost her place at the table long before tonight. She was a guest in her own marriage, an outsider to the life she thought was hers. Then, without hesitation, Rebecca reached across the table, her hand brushing over Michael's, and resting there with a tenderness that broke the final illusion. Karen's breath hitched, her body rigid as the world around her blurred. The chatter of the restaurant dulled, the clinking of glasses muted. All she could see was their joined hands, displayed without shame, without hesitation, directly in front of her. Michael did not pull away. He did not flinch. Instead, he allowed it, as if confirming what Karen's heart had feared all along. In that moment, silence became louder than any words could be, and Karen knew that her life would never again return to what it had been. Karen sat in silence long after the dinner ended, the image of Rebecca's hand on Michael's still burning in her mind. She had forced herself to smile politely, to mask the storm raging inside her as the evening dragged on, but the moment she stepped outside and slid into her car, the dam broke. Her chest heaved with sobs she had held back all night, tears blurring her vision as she gripped the steering wheel. The betrayal felt raw, immediate, like a wound torn open without warning. For 22 years she had built a life on trust, and in one evening, that trust had been shattered before her eyes. Alone in the dim parking lot, the glow of the streetlights casting shadows across her face, Karen whispered to herself questions she couldn't answer. How long had it been going on? Why had he chosen this night, this place, to reveal it so openly? And most crushing of all, had their marriage ever been what she believed, or had she been living inside a carefully constructed lie? In the days that followed, Karen's world shifted in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Michael carried on as though nothing unusual had happened, dismissing her silence with indifference, his focus fixed on work calls and unexplained late nights. But Karen could no longer ignore what she had seen. Every movement, every word of his felt like an echo of deception. She confided in Evelyn, who listened with wide eyes and a tightening jaw. "Karen," she said firmly, "you need to know who this woman is. You deserve the truth." It was Evelyn who pushed her to ask questions, to probe for answers, even as Karen hesitated, terrified of what she might uncover. Each night, lying awake in the bed they had once shared in comfort, Karen's mind circled the same thought. Rebecca wasn't just some passing stranger. She had been expected. That third menu wasn't the first signal. It was the latest in a long trail of signs Karen had refused to see. Karen began to dig quietly, piecing together fragments from overheard conversations and stray details Michael had left behind. It didn't take long before her suspicions found a devastating anchor. Rebecca was not just a mistress. She was an employee at Michael's firm. The realization left Karen both sickened and furious. This wasn't only a betrayal of vows. It was a violation of professional boundaries, a scandal that could ripple beyond their marriage into every aspect of their lives. It explained the unexplained expenses, the secretive calls, the perfume she had smelled on his clothes. Rebecca had been woven into Michael's world in ways Karen could barely stomach. Worse still, the knowledge made her feel complicit somehow, as though her silence, her willful ignorance, had allowed this deceit to grow unchecked until it consumed everything. She saw Michael now not as a partner, but as a stranger who had been living beside her, building a second life while destroying the first. As whispers began to circulate, Karen felt the weight of judgment from those around her. Friends at church grew cautious in their smiles, their eyes darting to hers before lowering in quiet pity. Evelyn stood firmly by her side, but others avoided the subject, unwilling to confront the scandal head-on. Even family gatherings grew tense, with siblings offering forced small talk while sidelong glances carried the questions they dared not ask aloud. It was Amanda's reaction, however, that cut Karen the deepest. When their daughter came home one weekend and stumbled across a stray message on Michael's phone, a text from Rebecca too intimate to misinterpret, her face crumpled. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking. Karen, unable to shield her any longer, nodded through tears. Amanda's sobs echoed her own, a sound Karen would never forget. For her daughter, the foundation of family had cracked in an instant, and for Karen, the guilt of protecting her from the truth too long became almost unbearable. The tension reached a breaking point when Karen, left alone in the house one evening, wandered into Michael's office. It was a room she rarely entered, his private domain filled with stacks of files, company papers, and the faint scent of his cologne. She sat at his desk, her eyes scanning the surface, searching for answers she couldn't yet put into words. That was when she saw it. A manila folder tucked slightly askew, almost hidden beneath a ledger. Something about its placement struck her. With trembling hands, she pulled it free, her breath catching as she read the label scrawled across the front. The handwriting was unmistakably Michael's, but the words, curt, cryptic, and urgent, sent a chill racing down her spine. She turned the folder over, hesitating, her fingers lingering at the edge. Whatever was inside held answers, perhaps even the truth she both craved and feared. Karen closed her eyes, clutching the folder to her chest. She was not ready to open it, not yet. But she knew this document was the key to unraveling the deception, and once she looked inside, there would be no turning back. Karen waited days before she gathered the strength to return to Michael's office. The manila folder still lodged in her mind like a weight she could not carry, yet could not set down. One evening, while Michael was out and Amanda had returned to campus, she closed the door quietly behind her and sat again at the heavy desk. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the folder from its hiding place. This time, she didn't hesitate. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning page after page of documents that made her stomach twist. It wasn't just receipts or notes. It was evidence. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, numbers that made no sense to the life they lived. The sums were staggering, far beyond what Michael ever disclosed to her or claimed as income. Karen's heart raced. This wasn't the record of a husband cutting corners to hide an affair. This was something much bigger, something that could destroy not just their marriage but everything they owned, everything Amanda's future depended on. The realization hit her like a blow. She hadn't just been lied to about another woman. She had been living beside a man who had built an entire secret life in the shadows. The folder led her to other discoveries. Tucked within the pages was a business card, the name Rebecca scrawled faintly on the back in Michael's handwriting, alongside a phone number Karen did not recognize. A sick understanding began to form. Rebecca wasn't just a fleeting distraction. She was woven into Michael's schemes, perhaps willingly, perhaps as a pawn. In a rush of anger, Karen searched deeper through his drawers, opening files he had carefully locked away. That was when she found the second cell phone, hidden beneath a stack of quarterly reports. It was sleek, newer than the one he carried openly, and its message log revealed conversations that left no room for denial. Michael had been meeting Rebecca regularly, sometimes under the guise of business, sometimes under the veil of intimacy. But there were other names too. Other women, other meetings, stretching back years. Rebecca was not the first. She was simply the latest in a line of betrayals Karen had never seen coming. Her marriage was not just broken. It had been fractured for far longer than she had known. Karen's hands shook as she pieced together the scope of what she was reading. It wasn't just affairs and lies. The bank statements in the folder revealed accounts overseas, balances that dwarfed the money they had ever discussed in their home. These were hidden bank accounts Michael had been siphoning money into quietly, year after year. Some accounts bore shell company names Karen had never heard of, others linked directly back to his firm. The numbers pointed toward embezzlement, the kind of fraud that couldn't stay buried forever. Karen's mind spun. Was Rebecca connected because she worked at the firm? Had Michael used her not just as a lover but as an accomplice? Each page felt heavier than the last, as though every line of print peeled away another layer of the man she thought she knew. She sat frozen, the room closing in on her, wondering how long she had been living in the shadow of this deception, wondering whether Michael had ever been the man she had once trusted. In the following weeks, Karen noticed small shifts she hadn't seen before. Michael grew more paranoid, more secretive. He took calls in the garage, his voice low and urgent. He left his briefcase locked, snapping at her when she asked about its contents. Twice she caught him leaving the house late at night, offering flimsy explanations when he returned near dawn. The more she saw, the more she realized the man she had married had constructed two lives, the one she lived with him, and the one he lived in secret. Karen began to document everything quietly, saving copies of papers, noting dates and times, collecting a trail she didn't fully understand but felt compelled to preserve. When Evelyn asked how she was holding up, Karen told her only part of the truth. She didn't dare reveal the full extent of what she knew, not yet. because every discovery left her more certain that Michael's lies were dangerous, and speaking too soon could cost her more than her marriage. It wasn't long before whispers of Michael's financial dealings reached beyond Karen's household. A quiet inquiry began within his firm. Discrepancies in ledgers, unusual transfers, and staff members asking cautious questions led to the involvement of investigators. At first, it was subtle. Calls Karen overheard, Michael's sudden need to step outside whenever the phone rang. Then, it grew. She noticed unmarked cars parked near their street at odd hours, men in plain clothes watching from a distance. Karen's stomach sank as she realized this was bigger than her suspicions. Michael wasn't just under suspicion for infidelity. He was under investigation for crimes that could bring their entire life crumbling down. The thought terrified her, but at the same time, it explained everything. The secrecy, the hidden accounts, the second phone, the younger women tied to his name. Michael's double life was no longer a theory. It was fact, exposed piece by piece, and now it was no longer contained within their marriage. It was out in the open, unraveling under scrutiny. Karen's worst fears deepened the night Michael came home angrier than she had ever seen him. He slammed his phone on the counter, muttering about people asking the wrong questions. His face was pale, his voice strained, and for the first time she caught a glimpse of fear behind his anger. He tried to mask it, insisting everything was fine, but Karen knew better. She had the folder hidden safely where he would never find it, but the knowledge within it burned at her. She considered going to the police herself, but fear held her back. What if Michael discovered what she knew? What if he turned on her? She didn't trust him anymore, not even in the confines of their own home. That night, as she lay awake listening to his restless movements, she realized the man beside her was not just a husband who had betrayed her. He was a man standing on the edge of exposure, and if he fell, he might try to drag her with him. By the time Karen pieced everything together, the investigation had already begun to close in. She overheard snippets, names she didn't recognize, transactions too complex for her to follow. But one thing was certain. Michael was no longer in control. He was being watched. The mask he wore so easily in public was cracking, and his life of deception was inching toward collapse. For Karen, the fear grew heavier. She thought she understood betrayal when she saw Rebecca's hand on Michael's at the restaurant. But that moment paled compared to what she now faced. She was married to a man who wasn't just unfaithful. He was dishonest to his core, a man building his future on lies, theft, and broken promises. And just as the walls closed in on him, Karen began to wonder if the fallout would consume her as well. But when investigators dug deeper, they discovered something Karen never expected. She was in danger too. It began with a phone call just past midnight. Karen was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while Michael snored beside her, when the sound shattered the silence. At first, she thought it might be Amanda calling from campus, but the number on the screen was unknown. Against her better judgment, she answered, whispering a cautious hello. What came next sent chills down her spine. A voice, low and distorted, spoke only 7 words before the line went dead. Stay quiet, or you'll regret everything. Karen sat frozen in the dark, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might wake Michael. She replayed the words over and over, trying to recognize the voice, but it was untraceable, mechanical, as if designed to hide its owner. She didn't tell Michael. She didn't trust him. Instead, she lay awake until morning, staring at the phone still clutched in her hand, knowing that someone out there was watching her, and that her discovery of the folder had not gone unnoticed. The calls continued over the following week, always at night, always from numbers she couldn't trace. Sometimes it was silence, heavy breathing that made her skin crawl. Other times it was short phrases, leave it alone, or you don't know who you're dealing with. Karen began to dread the darkness, jumping at the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She stopped answering at first, but the silence was worse than the words. She could feel the presence behind them, the certainty that someone was targeting her directly. One evening, As she drove home from the charity center where she volunteered, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. The car followed her through 3 turns, then 4, never too close, never far enough to ignore. When she accelerated, it matched her speed. Karen's palms slickened against the steering wheel as panic surged. Only when she pulled into her driveway and turned sharply did the car continue down the street, vanishing into the night. She sat in the driver's seat long after, trembling, wondering who it had been, Michael, Rebecca, or someone else entirely. Karen finally broke when Amanda returned home for a weekend visit. Her daughter immediately noticed the tension in the house, the way Karen jumped at sudden sounds and checked the locks repeatedly. That night after dinner, Amanda pressed her mother, refusing to let her hide behind vague reassurances. The truth spilled out in fragments, Karen's voice breaking as she confessed that Michael had betrayed them, that she had found things she should never have found, that someone had been calling her with threats. Amanda's face paled as she listened, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Mom," she whispered, "you have to go to the police." But Karen shook her head. She couldn't, not yet. She promised Amanda instead that she would protect her, no matter what it took. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched her daughter's hands. "You are all I have," she said fiercely. "I will not let anything happen to you." It was a vow spoken through trembling lips, a vow Amanda believed, but deep down, Karen wondered how long she could keep it. The spiral deepened quickly. Michael grew more erratic, his temper sharper, his absences longer. Karen didn't know whether to fear him or the shadow surrounding him. Rebecca's presence loomed larger too. Karen had seen her outside the firm once, standing near Michael's car, their conversation animated and tense. She ducked away before they noticed, but the image stayed with her, Rebecca gesturing urgently, Michael shaking his head, both of them aware of stakes Karen could only guess at. The lines blurred in her mind. Was Rebecca a victim or an accomplice? Was Michael protecting her, or was she the one pulling strings behind the scenes? Every answer Karen reached for unraveled as quickly as it formed, leaving her in constant doubt, caught between fear of her husband and suspicion of the woman who had shattered her marriage. Then, without warning, Karen was gone. For 48 hours her phone went dark. Evelyn tried calling, Amanda tried calling, but no one could reach her. She had left no note, no explanation, only an empty house and unanswered questions. Amanda sat on her childhood bed clutching her phone, sobbing into Evelyn's shoulder as fear consumed her. Had her mother run to protect herself? Had Michael forced her to disappear? Or had the threats she whispered about finally been carried out? The silence stretched unbearably long, 2 days of panic and speculation, until her absence became the new mystery, one that left everyone asking, where was Karen, and what had happened to her in the shadows she feared? Karen's disappearance had thrown everyone into turmoil. Amanda could barely focus at school. Evelyn pressed the police for answers, and Michael remained strangely detached, insisting to anyone who asked that Karen had simply needed space. But when Karen resurfaced, shaken and visibly haunted, the story shifted in ways no one could have predicted. She told Evelyn in a broken whisper that she had been approached, cornered by men she didn't recognize, who warned her against speaking of what she had found in Michael's office. They mentioned Rebecca by name, and for Karen, that detail was the final confirmation that this affair was not just personal betrayal. It was business, and it was far more dangerous than she had understood. Rebecca was not simply a mistress. She was connected to Michael's professional life in ways Karen could barely grasp, and her presence at that dinner table had been more than scandal. It had been strategy, a move in a game Karen hadn't realized she was part of until it was too late. As investigators began to unravel Michael's finances, new threads emerged. A rival businessman had been watching Michael's firm for months, suspecting embezzlement and financial misconduct. When prosecutors pieced together the timeline, one name appeared again and again: Rebecca. Not only was she an employee at Michael's company, but she had also been in contact with this rival, passing along information, financial records, and details of Michael's movements. What looked like a private affair was, in reality, part of a calculated plot. Rebecca had been placed in Michael's life deliberately, her charm and proximity designed to weaken him from the inside. Karen, sitting silently in the back of the investigation room as these facts emerged, felt her blood run cold. The betrayal she had witnessed at dinner had been personal, yes, but also orchestrated. She was not only betrayed as a wife, she had been used as leverage, a pawn in a larger scheme that put her directly in the crosshairs. The pressure mounted as prosecutors laid out their case. Documents from Michael's office showed patterns of fraud and embezzlement stretching back years. Testimonies placed Rebecca at the center of critical meetings, slipping files, whispering information, and coordinating with Michael's rival to corner him financially. But as the walls closed in, Michael refused to collapse quietly. In a stunning move, he shifted the blame outward. When questioned, he insisted Karen had known all along. He claimed she had signed off on certain financial decisions, had benefited from the accounts, and had even been aware of his second phone. To prosecutors, the accusation cracked the narrative wide open. Was Karen the blind victim she appeared to be? Or had she been complicit, turning a blind eye to her husband's crimes while quietly reaping the rewards? Michael's calm delivery made his words cut deeper, and suddenly, Karen found herself not only betrayed, but branded with suspicion. The case gained traction in the media. Headlines painted Karen in conflicting shades. Some described her as the devastated wife caught in her husband's corruption, while others suggested she was a co-conspirator, playing innocent while hiding her own guilt. Amanda watched the coverage with disbelief, unable to reconcile the woman who raised her with the accusations splashed across the screen. Evelyn, fiercely protective, dismissed Michael's claims as the desperate lies of a man trying to save himself, but the damage had already been done. Karen was dragged into courtrooms, her name tied to evidence she barely understood, her life dissected by strangers who saw her as either naive or calculating. Each day blurred into the next, the weight of suspicion pressing down harder than she could bear. She wondered if the investigators truly believed her protests, or if every word she spoke only dug her deeper into a role she never chose to play. And then came the final blow. In a hearing that stretched late into the evening, Michael's attorneys presented documents that seemed to implicate Karen directly. Her signature on a form linked to one of the hidden accounts. Karen stared at the page in horror. She had no memory of signing it, no reason she ever would have, but the ink was hers, the strokes of her handwriting undeniable. Gasps echoed in the room as the paper was passed forward, and Michael sat back in his chair with an expression that was equal parts smug and resigned. For Karen, it was as if the ground had vanished beneath her. Was she being framed, her trust exploited in ways she couldn't even comprehend? Or had her husband managed to twist her actions, her unwitting consent, into proof of complicity? The audience was left suspended in the silence that followed, torn between two versions of the truth. Karen as victim, or Karen as accomplice. The trial became the spectacle no one could look away from. For weeks, cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters clamored for statements, and each day inside the courtroom unfolded like a theater of betrayal. Karen sat quietly at the defense table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Michael's attorney spun a narrative that painted her as an accomplice. But the prosecutors pressed forward with a mountain of evidence, each document and testimony stripping away Michael's carefully constructed image. Witness after witness took the stand. Employees who had noticed irregularities, associates who recalled strange transactions, investigators who traced the labyrinth of bank accounts. And then there was Rebecca. In a dramatic turn, she struck a deal with prosecutors, testifying against Michael in exchange for leniency. The words she spoke were devastating, not only exposing his financial crimes, but admitting her role in passing documents to his rival. Every revelation cut deeper into Michael's defense. And for Karen, listening to Rebecca describe the man she had once loved as though he were a stranger, the pain was almost unbearable. The jury deliberated for 3 long days, tension hanging heavy in every hallway of the courthouse. Karen sat beside Evelyn during breaks, her friend whispering reassurances she could barely absorb. Amanda visited when she could, her presence both comforting and heartbreaking. She held her mother's hand, whispering that no matter what the papers said, she believed her. Finally, the jury returned, faces grave as the courtroom hushed. The foreperson stood, voice steady as the verdicts were read aloud. Guilty on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The words reverberated through the chamber, each one another nail in the coffin of Michael's double life. Karen exhaled, not with relief but with a hollow ache. The man she had shared her life with, raised a child with, and defended against whispers had been unmasked completely. Michael stared straight ahead, expression blank, as the judge delivered the sentence. In that moment, Karen understood that the life she had built was gone, its foundation broken beyond repair. Karen's name was eventually cleared, the charges against her dismissed after evidence showed she had been manipulated, her signature forged, her trust exploited. But though she walked out of court legally free, her reputation bore the scars of the ordeal. Neighbors whispered when she passed, her once friendly community now fractured by suspicion and gossip. At the grocery store, she caught glances that lingered too long, pity mixed with doubt. To some, she would always be Michael's wife, the woman who must have known something. Evelyn remained steadfast, Amanda protective, but the weight of judgment was one Karen carried alone. Nights felt lonelier, the silence of her home deafening. She often wondered how much of her life had been a lie, how many moments with Michael had been genuine, and how many had been part of the mask he wore. It was a question without an answer, one that left her staring into the past, searching for signs she had missed. One evening, months after the trial had ended, Karen found herself back at a restaurant. The lights were low, the chatter of strangers filling the air just as it had that night months before. She sat at a table set for two, the soft flicker of a candle illuminating her face. In front of her, two menus lay neatly arranged. She stared at them for a long time, her hand brushing the edge of one before pushing it aside. Across from her, the chair remained empty, a hollow space that reminded her of everything she had lost. Tears welled in her eyes, not from anger anymore, but from the weight of absence. She was no longer the same woman who had walked into that restaurant with hope of reconciliation. She was someone remade by betrayal, by deception, and by survival. And in that silence, with the empty chair across from her, Karen realized that some questions could never truly be answered. For Karen, the question was never about the third menu. It was about who would sit across from her and who would never return. In the end, Karen walked out of the courthouse a free woman, but freedom did not mean peace. Michael's conviction had closed one chapter, but for Karen, the echoes of betrayal never truly left her. She replayed that dinner again and again, the third menu sliding onto the table like a silent warning she hadn't understood in the moment. She thought of Rebecca's smile, of Michael's calm lies, of Amanda's tears when the truth spilled out, and she wondered how so much darkness had been hidden beneath the surface of her life. Evelyn reminded her often that she had survived, that she had endured what would have broken many others. But in Karen's quiet moments, she questioned whether survival was enough. Was she merely the victim of her husband's double life? Or had her silence, her trust, and her willful ignorance made her complicit in ways she could never erase? These questions lingered, unresolved, as heavy as the secrets that had destroyed her family. So now the question falls to you. What do you believe really happened that night? Was Karen simply betrayed, an unsuspecting wife caught in the fallout of Michael's corruption and Rebecca's deception? Or was she more involved than she ever admitted? A silent partner who allowed herself to look away until the truth grew too large to ignore. The documents, the accusations, and the courtroom revelations left the world divided, and even now the truth feels tangled in shadows. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, because stories like Karen's are not just about the facts. They are about perception, about the way betrayal reshapes our understanding of trust. And if you thought this story was chilling, wait until you hear what happened when a bride walked down the aisle, only to find the groom missing. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.